Hello and welcome to the Education Station podcast from EdQuarter, in which we'll be bringing you interviews with the industry's top leaders from across the edtech, independent and higher education sectors, as well as debates on current news and our favourite news stories. I'm Charley Rogers, the editor of Education Technology, and today I'm joined by Vivi Friedgut, the founder and CEO of edtech startup Blackbullion, which delivers financial education to students. You may have heard of Blackbullion in the news recently as they won the UK semi-finals of the prestigious GESAwards, which means they'll be representing the country at the global finals in January. However, you might not know about Vivi's ideal edtech interviewee and her somewhat controversial views on the cost of education. So we've spoken before, Vivi, about Blackbullion, and because you are focused on finance, we started talking about the cost of education, which is always the elephant in the room. So I'm really interested to know what you think of our current system and how you think the cost of education is impacting learning outcomes for young people.
Yeah, it's a really good question. And I think it's not just the UK. I think it's actually a global question. What do we do about an education system that is really tackling a whole bunch of challenges, because the world is changing really quickly and the world of work is changing very quickly, and education is, it's the tip of the sword in tackling a lot of that. And so it's changing within an ever-changing environment, which is actually a real challenge. The finances, of course, kind of underpin everything else. And my perspective is somewhat controversial in that I believe that education costs money, and therefore somebody has to fund it. And the fairest system is that individuals who will benefit from that education should pay for their education. That said, the American system, I think, is possibly the worst in the world, sort of the ones that we know of, because having it as as effectively a mortgage when you graduate is, it stymies people from being able to do everything else in their life. So I actually think that the system we have in England and in a lot of Britain is actually a really good system, whereby the government steps up and pays for it, and then you pay it back when you can afford it. Actually, what's unfair is that the taxpayer is funding kind of the 70%, 60%, depending on which study you look at, of those students who will never pay back their education. And there's a question about whether or not that's fair. There are things that I think that we can do better. I think that the idea that a medical degree effectively costs the same as an ancient history degree, clearly something there doesn't make sense. My brother studied medicine and he used a lot more resource and had a lot more contact hours than I did studying economics. So, I think that there is an element that we need to look at there. And I really, really believe the government should very strongly look back at maintenance grants for the sort of most disadvantaged students and the ones that most struggle financially, because there's no question that finances impact on people's ability to graduate. We know that that's a fact, and anything that we can do, I think, is worth looking at seriously.
And it does really help. You might look at the maintenance grants and think that they are a negligible impact. But I had a bit of a maintenance grant when I was at university, and they do make a huge difference.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And, if the maintenance loan was what was determined to be the better method, then we need to look at ensuring that people have sufficient money. Yeah. So the repayment of it is almost secondary to what people can access. And when we look at what accommodation costs, there are towns and cities across the UK where your entire maintenance loan, if you are receiving the maximum amount, the entire thing gets used for rent. Yeah. Which means that it's not fit for purpose. So whether it's a loan or a grant, to me, is secondary. The amount is primary. But there is no question that supporting the most disadvantaged and supporting, first in family students and those that might not have the same access to family support or other support, we either have to be a system which is only for people who are privileged enough to have money, or we have to be a system that can support everyone. And that's a question. That's a societal question about values.
Sure. And when we talk about this kind of thing, the thing that hits me most is your practicality. So I feel like you have a super practical approach to finance and to student life. And I think that shows through Blackbullion as well. And I am the sort of person that tends towards a bit of idealism, I don't mind saying. And so I was just wondering if you think that in instances like this one, that too much idealism is damaging?
It's a really great question. And I'm very prone to kind of Pollyanna thinking. I think that we can change the world and everything can be fabulous. And if everyone ate their spinach, we'd all be big and strong, right? So yeah. there is an element, there's definitely an element of that. The challenge with finance, and it's not just finance, it's in a lot of areas, is that there is the tendency for things to become overwhelming. And I was just having a conversation this morning about the environmental movement, which in many ways I think there's a lot of parallels. And part of, I think, the danger of the way that the environmental story is coming out is it's an overwhelming, this is a catastrophe, there's nothing we can do. And what that means is that if you feel things are so overwhelming, they become paralyzing, and you're like, well, if the world's going to hell anyway, then what does it matter if I buy plastic bottles, for example? And so for me and the ethos of Blackbullion when it comes to money is, yes, it is a big challenge, but there are bite-sized steps that you can take in order to improve the overall situation. So there's no point talking to 18-year-old students about the fact that they're going to have to save, £500,000 for retirement. There just isn't, because it's too much money and it's too far ahead and it's just too much. And so no one's going to bother. Whereas if you say to people, how much are you spending on takeaways in a week? Can you go down to half? Like if you're buying 4 takeaways in a week, can you buy 2? So we're not saying don't do it, but here's a practical way of saving £20 in a week. And actually, if you do that, you're talking about £1,000 in a year. So there are kind of like small steps that we can take. And that is all about making it practical and making it something that people can relate to. I can cut down on 1 coffee, like that I can do. But, and it's like everything. It's like losing weight, right? I'm not going to try and lose 50 pounds. I'm going to try and lose 1 pound and then another 1 pound. So I think it's just about making it manageable for people so they don't give up.
And that's such a good life skill too, right? That's a process you apply to so many things. When you come into work on a Monday and you've got 20 things on your list, if you look at those 20 things and think, oh my goodness, this is so overwhelming, I don't know where to start, then you're not going to get through them. But if you take one thing and complete that and continue in that manner, then you're going to get more done.
100%. I mean, the old joke about how you eat an elephant, right?
Yeah.
One bite at a time. And it is, every facet of our life is exactly the same. Life is a very complicated, overwhelming journey. But if you look at it one day at a time and you look at it 1 hour at a time, and I mean, kind of leaning into the mental health element as well, sometimes you'll have a bad day or you'll have a bad hour, but that's not a bad life.
Yeah.
And so look at everything in itself and, what can you do? So, today you haven't looked after your health as well as you would, or you've eaten, I have days where I'm eating way too much chocolate because I'm running between meetings. There's no point then, freaking out about it. It's like, well, tomorrow I'll be better and have a salad. You've just got to take everything, mouthful by mouthful, so to speak, about your elephant. And, we do get through stuff and ask for help, and money's exactly the same. There's a lot of support out there. And if things are overwhelming, you just got to break it down into smaller chunks. And if you can't do it, there's a lot of help out there to do it, no matter what age you are, certainly at university, but as an adult as well, there's plenty of support out there.
What you've just touched on there is incredibly interesting and very topical as well. It's recently been Mental Health Awareness Day.
Yes.
And money is a big bugbear when it comes to mental health. It's a huge stressor, a huge trigger, and something that doesn't get talked about as much in the mental health space as some other stressors, such as workload, do. So how do you think the current financial landscape is affecting students? Because it's so different, right, than it was 20 years ago.
Very different. I mean, I often laugh that things were so different in my day, and then I realized that my day was 20 years ago. So it's funny how that works. I think that there's kind of a couple of issues specifically around mental health. So the one is that we are still kind of a little bit amazed and surprised when mental health and financial health are decoupled.
Right.
So we have spoken to a number of universities who've said, yes, we believe that financial capability and people's financial health is important, but this year we're focusing on mental health. And that's really interesting to us because we don't see how you can separate the two. Money is one of the biggest stressors and the biggest triggers that people have. So that's really interesting to me and a little bit like, don't really get that, but okay. So I do think that the two are sort of linked in a way that is impossible to break. I do think that students today are facing a range of challenges that we simply didn't face. And social media, I mean, it's easy to dump on social media, but social media is playing a massive role in that. If you are looking at Instagram and you're looking at other people's lives and it's a snapshot of a moment which was filtered and you assume that that's other people's lives, then you're going to try and catch that up.
Yeah.
You know, we've taken peer pressure and we've made it global and relentless. And that is incredibly damaging, financially and mentally, incredibly damaging, and physically, to be honest. So, you know, I mean, I'm a big fan of Instagram, but I'm also very conscious that it's not reality. Yeah. But that's because I didn't grow up with it.
Yeah, I think it's so different. I'm the same. I do like Instagram, but I also couldn't imagine having it in school. It sounds like it would be the worst thing ever.
I completely agree. I think we were a really lucky generation because we grew up without the technology. So, you know, we played outside. I mean, it's all the cheesy stuff that everybody talks about. You know, we played outside. We weren't as scared as kind of we are today of so many things. We formed deeper connections, I think, in a lot of ways because you didn't have the distractions around you. And then when technology really kind of took off, so to speak, we were already old enough to kind of see some of its downsides, which is not to say that, you know, our generation hasn't gotten in trouble with technology. I've had friends who've gotten into massive gambling debt, you know, for example. But I think we were very, very lucky because we know that it's not true. But if it's all you've ever known, then it's like this parallel universe that you're competing with 24/7. You know, I feel for them.
And I feel like we had the luxury of being bored.
Yes, absolutely agree.
If that doesn't sound sort of too pop psychology.
Yeah, 100% agree with that. 100% agree with that. I made a rule years ago that I would allow no technology in the bedroom. And so my mobile phone gets turned off. It doesn't go to silent. It gets turned off. I have a 10-pound piece of garbage alarm clock. And the radio goes off in the morning and I don't check my phone until I walk out of the front door. And I sleep like a baby. I have no sleeping issues. I have no, you know, I get all the whatever things you're supposed to get while you're sleeping in terms of the hormones. I sleep so well and I feel for people who can't turn it off. It's a genuine addiction.
For sure. And it's designed that way.
Absolutely. Yeah. It's a difficult time for young people. There's a lot going on and they're being bombarded from all sides. And to compete, you need money and you need to do what everybody else is doing. And it's almost no wonder that we're setting young people up in a sense to fail in some of these things, which is part of what we are part of the conversation that we are trying to change and trying to have.
And so I think you've got a really refreshing approach to this kind of thing. You're practical, but you're also really optimistic about the abilities of technology and how, as you said earlier, we can change the world if we all try our best. So I just wanted to know what your own education journey was like. Did you enjoy school?
So education in my family is like the be all and end all. I'm actually a third generation university student. So my grandmother went to university and I didn't actually know that you could leave school before you got your bachelor's degree. I didn't know that it was allowed. So
no way.
Yeah. So, I mean, I'm the least educated in my family. Both of my brothers have master's degrees and my brother's doing his second master's degree and I just did a bachelor's. So that was the approach in my family. Books never touched the ground. We had a much bigger bookshelf than we had anything else. So that was kind of, I consider myself very lucky that was the environment in which I grew up. But it also, my journey through education in a way was like, quote unquote, really easy because it was just what you did. And I've got such enormous admiration for people for whom university, you know, for people who are first in family or who, you know, who go as mature age students, because all of those journeys are so much harder because it is something that is brand new. And I've got enormous admiration for people who take the path less traveled, which in some families is university. So yeah, so my background was very education focused, like right throughout, but I didn't love school. I loved the discourse, and even to this day, I will happily get into an argument or a discussion about any number of subjects. But at university, I got very involved in like student politics, and you know, I loved a good debate. And I was part of debating clubs and things like that. But today I read a book a week.
Wow, that's great.
Yeah, so I love the learning about stuff that I enjoy, but there was no options in my family. Like, we used to multiply. I mean, it's so nerdy, but in my family, like on long car rides, we'd have races to see who could multiply the numbers on number plates.
That's so great.
Well, I mean, if by great you mean super nerdy, then absolutely agree.
Yeah, I am for sure on board with the nerdiness. I think that's wonderful.
But as a consequence, we all have great numeracy skills, right? And we're all very heavy debaters. And a couple of weeks ago, I was in Australia visiting my family, and there were some people at the table who were asking about Brexit, because of course you live in the UK, so you must know what's going on. And there was a guest at the table, because it was like all the extended family. And he was like, oh, I'm really glad I asked, because otherwise you guys wouldn't be talking politics. My youngest brother turned around and went, we always talk politics. We would just be talking about a different politics, because that's just how my family is. But it's not, all families are different, but I do feel very privileged to have grown up in a family where education was so highly valued.
And where did you go to university?
I went to university at the University of New South Wales in Sydney, because all my friends went there. that was why I went.
And did you enjoy university? Was that somewhere where you felt you could be yourself?
Yeah, I mean, as you know from the couple of conversations we've had, kind of embracing who I am is something that I just do because it's easier than pretending to be somebody else, because I'm just too lazy. So I've always been like quite proudly nerdy and loud. But I think the thing about university that I loved, so I studied economics and marketing, and I loved the debate and discussion and kind of delving more deeply into things that were theoretical. I think theory is great, and I've got huge respect for academia, but I'm very much about the practical. Like, what does this then mean? How can we then use this? And the studies that I did was very much about, how do you apply economics to real world? Like, don't tell me about the theory unless you're going to tell me how that then applies. And the rigor of that I really enjoyed.
Well, it seems to have done you very well.
So far, so good.
That's something I'm also interested in. And I think our listeners are always interested to hear about people's career trajectories and how things have gone. But I also wanted to ask you, what's the biggest mistake you've made in your career?
Oh, that is a great question. Biggest mistake that I have made in my career. Wow.
It's a tricky one, I know.
It is a tricky one. I mean, I've got like some regrets. I don't know about mistakes. I'm trying to think what a mistake would be. I mean, it's not in my career, but it's kind of as a result. So I started working in cold call sales, which I would highly recommend to anybody who's thinking about becoming an entrepreneur to spend some time doing cold call sales, because it's such a key skill. And I was making really big money for a 21-year-old because the internet was just starting to gain traction as a kind of commercial product. And I was selling, those crazy conferences that are like $3,000 a day. Yeah. I was selling those, but in like how to design a website. And so I was getting 15 people at a time booking at like $3,000 each. It was really big money for a 21-year-old. And I didn't invest it properly. I was living this massive life that you can only do when you're making that sort of money. So that's a regret. To be honest, I don't think I've made any honestly, no real mistakes kind of jump to mind, because any error that I've made has led me to where I'm supposed to be. Like, I regret not starting a business younger, but you could never have done financial literacy before the financial crisis because nobody cared.
Yeah.
Wow, it's such a good question. I love it.
Let's spin it then. Is there something that is on your bucket list for your career, or something you'd like to learn that you've not managed to tick off yet?
So there's a couple of things that I would still very much love to do. I would love to learn tech. I don't mean necessarily coding, because I kind of find the idea of coding kind of boring. I mean, people love it, and I think it's an important skill. I'm just not sufficiently interested enough in it, because it's not human as much as the things that I really enjoy, which are much more human interactive. Yeah. The one of the things that I wish I'd known when I started the business was how technology kind of works, how it like fits together. Because being a tech company, I am very heavily reliant on my CTO and other techies in my team and in the company to kind of walk me through how the technology works and can be applied. I don't have an intuitive feel for it. Yeah. And that's something that I would love to, by the way, there are no real books on this. There's like major courses about coding, but not like the commercial elements of technology, which I think is like a real gap it's something I'd love to write a book on.
Maybe that's your next project.
Yes, I'm writing my second book at the moment, and that would be my third one. So yeah, it's on the list. It's on the list. It's a very long bucket list. And the other thing that I'm really passionate about is politics and the role that politics plays in people's lives, not at the kind of government Westminster top level, top line, but actually at a retail level. How can politics influence people's lives for the better? I think government has a critical role to play in creating conditions for people to have the opportunities to create the lives that they want. And I feel sometimes the political kind of class forgets what its job is.
Yeah.
And so I feel very strongly about that.
Going back to your book, can you tell us what the second one's about, or is that very much under wraps?
No, so the second book is very much about my journey and the various, the kind of non-sexy things that nobody ever talks about. So as an early stage founder, everybody talks about, raising money and how to do marketing, but they don't tell you how to deal with the 3 a.m. panic, and they don't tell you how to choose an accountant, like kind of the stuff that's actually fundamentally core to the operational kind of elements of running a business. And just how to just keep going in terms of enterprise. Like every other facet of life, there are times when you're really inspired to do what you're doing, and there are other days where it's just crap and you just have to get through it. And sometimes the person who wins is just the last person left standing. So resilience and kind of just keeping on is a fundamental skill that I think, again, we don't speak about enough. We're very quick to quit.
Absolutely. And I think it's something that's being pushed more in schools now as well, in formal education.
Yep.
Teaching kids how to fail and be fine with that and get up and dust yourself off and keep going.
Yeah, and I think all the cliches are true, but until you've lived them, you don't realize that they're true, which is you knock down 7 times, you stand back up the 8th time. Like you just got to keep going. And like climbing a mountain is just like everything else in life. You've just got to put one foot in front of the other. And the days where you don't want to do it, those are the days that define you.
Yeah.
Because everybody carries on when it's easy. It's when things are a problem that you really know the measure of yourself.
Yeah.
But that doesn't drive everyone. Not everybody wants to see how far they can push themselves. And that's fine.
Yeah.
It depends what kind of person you are.
Exactly. It just reminds me of a great quote that I read once that I think is attributed to Eleanor Roosevelt. And it's something like, women are like tea bags. You never know how strong they are until they're in hot water.
Yeah, absolutely. I totally agree with that. She said some great things, right? The forgotten women in history.
Absolutely. She was the queen of the one-liners.
Yes, indeed.
So this is a variation on one of my favourite interview questions. If you could interview one person in the education space, who would it be?
One person in the education space.
This is my variation on the dinner party question.
Yeah. Not interestingly, I would very much like to interview Bill Gates.
Oh, yeah.
I think that his approach to giant problems is fascinating. I think that education is a very interesting kind of anomaly in the world, because on the one hand, it's a 1 + 1 + 1. On the other hand, it's 2 million university students and 5 million high schoolers. And Bill Gates's kind of approach to scale, I think, would be a really interesting thing to kind of delve into. I feel like in education we have a lot of the answers, but we don't necessarily have the answers when it scales. I think there's a lot of skills and a lot of critical ideas that we can do in one-to-one, but that we would struggle to do in grand scale. And I don't believe in silver bullets, but I believe that education is as close as we come to a silver bullet for people's futures and potential and opportunities. And if we can't achieve some of the great stuff that we achieve, if we can't achieve it at scale, then we will fail half the population by definition, because there's simply too many students. I would be fascinated by that. I love the idea that some of the greatest minds in business are applying their skill set to education. I think that's a fantastic kind of testament to them. But also, if the education space would make them comfortable to do that, I think the education space could massively benefit from it. I think he's right up there. I mean, there's so many wonderful kind of unsung heroes in the education space.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Vivi. It was really great to speak to you. So thanks for taking the time.
Thanks so much, Charlie.
And thank you to everyone out there for listening. Stay tuned because our next interview comes from our EdQuarter reporter, James Higgins, talking to Joe Grady, who's General Secretary of the University and College Union. You can subscribe now so you don't miss a single episode of the Education Station. Also, if you'd like to continue the conversation in the meantime and talk to leaders in the edtech sector, head to our member-only LinkedIn group, Education Technology, The Conversation. Thank you very much.